Hello, and welcome to the sixth webinar in NAPSA series entitled NAPSA Presents Experience from the Field. My name is Andy Gray, and I'm the director of the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance. NAPSA is a coalition of the leading accredited primate sanctuaries on the continent who collectively care for close to 800 apes, monkeys, and lemurs, all rescued and retired from biomedical research, the entertainment industry, and the pet trade. And in the years between our in-person NAPSA workshops that we hold every other year, we're always looking for ways to continue the helpful conversations and information sharing that the workshops are known for. And that's how this webinar series came to be. Our past NAPSA Experience from the Field webinars have been on a variety of topics like volunteer programs, facilities upkeep, starting a sanctuary garden program, and veterinary management considerations for different species of primates. But this time around, we're hearing about experience from the field on Capitol Hill. But before I get into it, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have missed any of our past webinars in the series, or just want to refresh your memory on what was shared, you can still watch those recordings by going to NAPSA's Facebook page, clicking on events, and then past events. And today's recording will live there as well. And there are more webinars to come, so I encourage you all to stay engaged with NAPSA on our email list, which you can sign up for on our website, primatesanctuaries.org, or by following us on social media. We're Primate Sanctuary here on Facebook, and our handle on Instagram is NAPSA Primates. And I'll drop all these links now for you in the chat just shortly, so you'll have them. And today, I'm very excited to share that we're joined by Kate Zalewski, the Assistant Director of Government Affairs at the Animal Welfare Institute. Kate has been with the Animal Welfare Institute since 2017 and works to advance policies that protect wildlife at the federal, state, and local levels. She has been a champion of the Captive Primate Safety Act for many years, and her presentation is going to provide an overview of the legislation, what it would achieve, its history, its current status, and what we can all do to help get it passed. And as she speaks, please feel free to post questions in the chat. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the hour, and we'll try to hit on as many of your questions as possible. So with that, thank you so much for being here, and take it away, Kate.
Thanks, Andy. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today, and truly has been an honor to work side by side with NAPSA and all of your member sanctuaries over the years as we have worked towards getting the Captive Primate Safety Act passed in Congress. So today I want to give an overview of some issues related to the pet primate trade in the United States, and then provide information about this bill that we're working on, where it is in Congress, and what you all can do to help. For many of you in the sanctuary world, some of this information will be things that you already know because you are so deeply enmeshed in the issues that arise with the sale and possession of pet primates. But I think it's important to have the full context of why passing the Captive Primate Safety Act is so important. So to start off with, there's a pet primate crisis in the United States. This is something that I think not a lot of people know about because most of the time, if your neighbor has a primate, if people in your town have a primate, there's really no way to know as long as that animal stays in the house. But it's estimated that thousands, if not tens of thousands of primates are currently kept as pets in the United States. And this estimate is extrapolated from incidents that are reported when these animals escape or attack somebody, from requests that law enforcement and sanctuaries and zoos receive for help with pet primates that can no longer be handled or kept, and other data that some states, but certainly not all, keep on who has a primate in their community. And I think it won't be a surprise to anybody that the internet plays a huge role in the sale of pet primates. Social media is full of people showing off the cute little baby monkey that they've bought, making TikTok videos and Instagram reels that show infant primates in diapers, in outfits. And if you go online and you Google buy a monkey, which I don't necessarily recommend doing, but if you do, you will see a huge number of hits, social media and other platforms that enable you to, for a relatively small amount of money, go and order one of these animals, and it will either come to you or you can go and pick it up. And there are a lot of studies that have been done about the prevalence of primates on the internet for sale. And there was a recent one, for example, that showed that in the study of primate sales on TikTok, the United States had the highest number of posts out of all the recorded countries. So while this is certainly an international problem, it's also something that urgently needs to be addressed within our own country. This is able to proliferate to the extent that it does because there are no federal regulations about pet primate ownership. There's a patchwork of state and local laws. Some states have a complete ban on pet primate ownership. Others have no restrictions whatsoever. And there are some in the middle that require some sort of license or permit in order to keep these species. But this patchwork of laws is clearly failing to create any sort of unified or enforceable system that would crack down on this huge problem that we know is only growing. So where do all these primates come from? And the answer to that is twofold. First of all, many of them are bred right here in the United States. There are a lot of breeders and dealers that are behind those internet ads. And in most states, like I said, that is perfectly legal. Other primates are smuggled in, particularly across our southern border, which I will get to later in this presentation. Importing primates into the United States for the purpose of the pet trade is illegal due to disease concerns. So that act of bringing them across the border is illegal. But once they're here in the United States, again, if you live in a state that has permissive laws, then you are free to sell that animal. And it is very difficult, if not often impossible, for law enforcement to trace it back and determine that it was a poached and trafficked animal that was brought in illegally. In the realm of wildlife trafficking, there's a surge right now that we're seeing, particularly of spider monkeys being imported, trafficked into this country. And that's something that, again, I'll provide more information on later in this presentation. So let's talk about why the pet primate trade is such a bad thing. And let's start off with the implications for animal welfare. Primates, from the little ones all the way up to the great apes, they suffer enormously when they are kept as pets. There is no possible way that a person can give these wild animals a life that approximates anything like what they would have in the wild when we're talking about these animals being kept in living rooms, in basements. And primates are almost always purchased as babies because they are small, they are cute, they almost seem like a human baby, very much in need of nurturing. But they mature quickly. They exhibit natural wild behaviors that end up within a matter of a year or two becoming completely incompatible with life inside a human household. And attempts by the owner to mold them to fit the expectations that they be a baby, that they be like a human child, that they be like a domesticated animal, they almost always end in pain and suffering for the primates. These animals, whether brought from the wild or bred in captivity, are torn from their mothers soon after birth because infant primates are what are profitable. And this disrupts a really strong maternal-child bond that would be normal in the wild and is enormously distressing for both the mother primate and the infant. These animals typically spend most, if not all, of their lives confined to small cages, especially once they start becoming strong and aggressive. They endure unnecessary mutilation, like tooth extraction, which is a response to them trying to bite the people around them. And they're kept in isolation without social contact with other members of their own species, which is so vital to their mental health because, like humans, most of these primate species are very social, and in the wild, they would have really complex social groupings that would be, a natural part of their behavior. So in addition to physical trauma, there's also the mental trauma. Many of these animals display severe mental distress, including through repetitive behaviors like rocking or self-mutilation. And a small number of them, of course, are fortunate enough to get placed in sanctuaries, to get rescued. But even those that do, as many of you in the sanctuary world know, they display lifelong struggles, physical and mental struggles that come from this entirely unnatural upbringing. This picture here is of a primate named Grandpa. Came from OPR Coastal Primate Sanctuary, or this photo did, and Grandpa was kept in a cage made entirely of wood with only a 4-inch area of these metal bars at the bottom. And you can see the distress that this animal endured while locked in that container for years before he was rescued. Another example, and I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but it's a story about this macaque named Summer, also provided by OPR Coastal Primate Sanctuary. And I just wanted to include this here as one more illustration of what these animals go through, because Summer tugs at my heartstrings every single time. She was bred in a private breeder's facility, taken away from her mother almost immediately, shipped thousands of miles to somebody who wanted to keep her as a pet. She was put in a diaper, and as she got older, she was increasingly distressed by this. And so when she would try and bite, the owner decided to have all of her teeth removed, which meant that her tongue didn't stay in her mouth, that she had to eat a diet of only mushy foods. And the owner ended up taping on the diaper, which left a rash so severe that it became a permanent trauma to the skin. She was kept in a small cage. She would rock neurotically. Her leg muscles atrophied. And the collar that was put on her was never taken off. It eventually embedded into her skin and had to be removed later with veterinary care. She was also mentally abused, being yelled at, causing enormous fear. And she lived like this for 17 years until she was finally surrendered to a sanctuary. So, while the images on social media of these primates may seem cute, may seem cuddly, it is truly devastating for these wild animals. In addition to the animal welfare concerns, there's also an enormous danger to the public of keeping primates in private homes. They are, like we said, unpredictable, aggressive, strong. Even the smallest primates have really intimidating teeth and strength that exceeds what you would expect for their size. And hundreds of people in the United States have reported being injured by pet primates over the past few decades. And we know that that's just the tip of the iceberg, that there are undoubtedly many, many more incidents that go unreported. And there have been some particularly tragic examples reported in the news over the years. One of them involved this chimpanzee right here named Travis, who, as I'm sure you all know, attacked Charlie Nash, who was the neighbor of his owner, in Connecticut back in 2009. Travis had been kept as a pet for many years, had obviously grown into a full adult chimpanzee. And one day just went after Charla and ripped off her face, her hands, transmitted a disease to her that caused her to go blind and nearly killed her. And unfortunately, the only thing that law enforcement could do to end this attack was to kill Travis, which was a hugely tragic end for people and primate alike. There have been other famous examples. There was the release of dozens of animals in Zanesville, Ohio back in 2011, which included 3 primates who all had to be killed by law enforcement. And one was eaten by a lion that day. Another instance in Pendleton, Oregon in 2021, where Buck, the chimpanzee who was kept as a pet, attacked his owner's daughter and caused severe injuries, and Buck was shot. There's never happy stories to when these wild animals are kept in a home, and it ends poorly for the people in the home, for the community around them, for the law enforcement officials who have to put their own safety on the line in order to handle these situations. And then, of course, for the animals themselves who never asked to be in that situation. In addition, primates can easily transmit a wide range of dangerous and potentially deadly diseases. Humans and non-human primates have a really close genetic relationship, which makes the potential for transmission of pathogens between us very high. And, there are a lot of diseases that can be asymptomatic in primates that when transmitted to humans can be deadly. And so it's never a good idea to be in close contact with these animals. And then, of course, these incidents that endanger the public, they put a strain on the resources of those in the community, like law enforcement, and the rescue organizations like sanctuaries that are asked to help. It's never the pet primate owner that is financially responsible for the consequences. It always ends up being others that have to come in and handle the situation. I want to turn now to the effects of the pet primate trade on wild primates. So like I said, some of these animals that end up in the United States are caught in the wild and are smuggled into this country. And spider monkeys, like I mentioned, have become a particularly popular choice as a pet in recent years, driven in large part by representation of spider monkey babies on social media. And this legal demand for pet primates within the US is driving the lucrative wildlife trade in these animals. From 2023 to 2025, the Fish and Wildlife Service reported that 109 baby spider monkeys were confiscated at the US-Mexico border, and they think that this is only a fraction of the number that were successfully smuggled through. And we've seen this number just grow and grow over the past few years. US Fish and Wildlife Service officials say that they're tipped off to spider monkeys for sale in Texas on a near weekly basis. And again, those are only the cases that they hear about. So because adults are harder to control and transport, it's the infants that are targeted in the wild, despite the extreme cost to the wild populations. The poachers will slaughter the mother so that they can steal the infant monkey from her arms, because the two cling very tightly to one another. And so you can't take the infant without harming the mother. And these babies are often sedated and bound. They are stuffed into bags and boxes and car trunks. And as they are brought up to the US-Mexico border and then smuggled in, they suffer intensely, and they often die along the way, which for the traffickers is just the cost of doing business. And the wild populations in South and Central America are obviously suffering as a result of this. Mexican spider monkeys, which are the most commonly trafficked subspecies right now, are classified as endangered by the IUCN Red List, and their population is currently still declining due to habitat loss and the pet trade. And this species is really vulnerable also because of the way that they reproduce. A female spider monkey has a long gestation period of about 7.5 months, and then they'll wait 2 to 4 years again before giving birth to another baby. So that makes the slaughter of females and the theft of infants even more devastating to their population. And this wildlife trade isn't just awful for the wild populations of primates. It also has effects on US national security. And this is something we've really been exploring a lot lately because we think it's important to highlight that this is not just a problem for animals, that it is interconnected with other issues that directly affect humans. These seizures of animals at the border put a significant burden on the resources of federal agencies. You know, it's the Department of Homeland Security, it's Fish and Wildlife Service, US Department of Agriculture, Department of Justice, and other agencies that all have to put resources into addressing this crisis, which diverts those resources from other priorities. And it also, wildlife trafficking intersects with criminal networks responsible for trafficking drugs, weapons, humans. These are all interconnected, and this is not small-time crime. These are massive international syndicates that find this trade in wildlife to be enormously lucrative and benefit from the fact that they can use the same smuggling routes for animals that they can for these other illicit products. And the interconnection of all of these criminal activities threatens our national security. You can't differentiate wildlife crime from what narcotics and arms trafficking are doing to US national security. It's all interrelated. And then in addition, as I mentioned before, primates can transmit a large number of diseases to people. And so wildlife trade creates a significant biosecurity risk. The exotic pet trade creates a huge number of contact points between primates and humans. So that includes the poachers, the local middlemen, transporters, law enforcement officials, and then buyers at the end of the chain. And so, these potentially diseased animals are coming into contact with a lot of people. And smuggled animals are also evading quarantine and veterinary screening requirements at the border that are mandatory for any animals that are legally entering the United States. So we don't know what these animals are bringing into the country. And, the federal officials at the border that are finding primates in car trunks, in backpacks, are on the front lines. They're having to come into contact with these animals on a regular basis. And that type of exposure shouldn't be part of their job requirement. That poses a real threat to them. And any biosecurity hazard has the potential to cause disease outbreaks in the United States or anywhere, which puts human lives in jeopardy, strains public health infrastructure, requires potentially a state or federal emergency response. I mean, we've seen what a pandemic can do. And these vulnerabilities are also national security threats, especially in an era where we are, very aware of the consequences of pandemics and other biological issues. So all of that context, and thank you for bearing with me, brings us to the Captive Primate Safety Act. I put the bill numbers here in both the House and the Senate. And this is a bipartisan federal bill that would end the pet primate trade in the United States. It would make it illegal for any private individual to breed, sell, or own non-human primates. This bill was first introduced in 2005, so we're talking now a little over 2 decades, and there have been a lot of versions throughout the years, but all of them have had the same goal: to end the pet primate trade in the United States. So the current version, in addition to that prohibition I just described, has exemptions that make this bill narrowly focused. This bill would have no effect whatsoever on research labs, exhibitors like zoos and circuses, sanctuaries, or universities. We are just talking about private individuals who want to keep a monkey in their home. And current pet owners would be grandfathered in. So their primates wouldn't be taken away from them, but they could not breed or acquire any new primates. And they would simply be required to register the animals they currently have to make sure that first responders are aware that those animals are in their community. And this bill with these bill numbers was reintroduced last year. And we have been working hard to build momentum on this bill. We think that the passage of the Big Cat Public Safety Act in 2022 provides great momentum and a great template for how to enact this legislation. And, the Big Cat Public Safety Act was overwhelmingly bipartisan, strongly supported across a huge number of stakeholder groups. And this bill absolutely has the potential to have the same support behind it. We do have an incredible list of endorsements for this bill, including, of course, NAPSA and many other sanctuaries, I think 24 at this point. And then also law enforcement has endorsed it, scientists, zoos, conservation organizations. There's a lot of interests that converge to create some groundswell and some pressure for passing this bill and making the case that it benefits both primates and humans. So that brings us to how you all can help with this legislation. And the main thing that you can do, of course, is reach out to Congress. Congress needs to hear from you. This bill is currently stalled in both the House and the Senate committees, and your representative and your senators, they need to know that this bill is a priority to you, either as an individual citizen, or if you represent an organization, then for that organization to reach out and express that as constituents, as people with experience with the pet primate trade, that you are strongly supportive of this bill. In addition, for any of you that do represent organizations, to similarly activate your base of supporters to contact Congress. If you have the capacity to send action alerts out, email messages, however you communicate with them, that's a great idea. If you want to share an alert that another group has put out, the Animal Welfare Institute and a bunch of other groups have alerts on our websites that you can certainly share, that provide a really easy way for people to just fill in their contact information and hit send to get emails sent to Congress. And then to use your platform, social media, newsletter, tours, whatever ways you're interacting with the public, to share information about the bill, why it's necessary, why we need to end the pet primate trade, and why this bill is our best shot at doing that. In addition, we need a broad coalition here. So if you can bring other stakeholders into this fight, for example, if you work regularly with sheriffs, police officers, animal control, anyone in the law enforcement community, with any other local officials, with any former pet primate owners who have regrets and have now dedicated themselves to making sure that no other primates end up in private hands. Those are all really useful voices, and we would really welcome their endorsements and similarly them spreading the word about this bill. For all of these actions, I am happy to help. If that's template language, if that's, getting contact information for folks in Congress, figuring out who your elected officials are, figuring out the best messaging, sharing our endorsement list, and suggesting how we could grow it. I am more than happy to help. I really, want to be working with everybody who's invested in this fight. So I'll close by saying that you all are trusted voices in your communities, especially all of you affiliated with sanctuaries that have been doing such incredible work caring for these animals. And most people want to know how they can help animals. So to the extent possible, let's spread the word and let people know how they can help pass the Captive Primate Safety Act. And with that, I'm done, and I will open.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was fantastic. And I actually would love to start us off with a question before. Right now, I don't see any in the chat, but please, if anyone has questions, we absolutely welcome them. But I wanted to actually ask what, if you could tell us a little bit about the timeline we're working with, how long we have to get this version of the bill passed, if there's anything coming up that we might need to be aware of, like any committee meetings or anything, just kind of time-wise, what we should be aware of.
Sure, absolutely. So Congress operates in a 2-year session. So right now in 2026, we are in year 2 of this session. So all bills that are currently active have until the end of this year to pass. If they don't pass, then they would have to be reintroduced in the new year in the next Congress. So for this current version of the Captive Primate Safety Act, that's the timeline that we're working with. Of course, if it doesn't pass this year, then we will absolutely be reintroducing it next year, and continuing to keep up the pressure. I think everybody is aware that it's a difficult and fractious political environment, which is just to say that not a lot of bills have been moving in this Congress. Just not a lot has been getting done. And so that doesn't deter us, but it does mean that we're realistic about using this time not only to be lobbying on the Hill, but also using it to continue to build this foundation that we can bring forward into a Congress where there might be a bigger window of opportunity to move it forward.
Great. That makes total sense. And, you pointed out in your presentation that various versions of this bill have been around since 2005. And I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on why you think it might have taken so long to get this passed. And, you also kind of mentioned the Big Cat Safety Act, and maybe if there's, I think there's definitely things we can learn from their successful passing of that legislation that's very similar. But I'm just curious for your thoughts on why you think it might have taken us so long up until this point.
Yeah, so I can't pretend that I've worked on this bill since 2005, but I have worked on it now for 13 years. And I will say in general with federal legislation, the timeline is a long one, sort of the horizon of what you look to in terms of getting any one bill passed is usually years out from when you start it. That was true also with the Big Cat Public Safety Act. And so it doesn't surprise me that it has taken a long time to build momentum, but I also think that it's important to be able to identify opportunities, identify times when there's a particular swell of public interest around a topic, or something that catalyzes a lot of stakeholder support behind something. For the Big Cat Public Safety Act, that was Tiger King. And, whatever whatever you may think about the contents of that show, it did reach a lot of eyeballs and it did get a lot of people talking. And, um, that was what made us prioritize the big cat bill at that moment because we saw this opportunity to get it across the finish line when everyone was talking about how awful it was, what was done to the animals on that show. And so the same is true here. I really feel like there are some great tailwinds for this bill that, the big cat bill passing is one of them, and seeing over the past few years how incredibly effective it's been and how well enforced it's been, showing that this model, this type of legislation really works. Also, I think the show Chimp Crazy coming out also provided some of that pop culture context. Again, whatever you think of the content of that show, it does illustrate to people that this is a problem in the United States. And then this fairly recent surge of spider monkeys coming across the border. This isn't something that we had seen to this scale previously, and it's making it into the news, and government agencies are putting out press releases about it. And there was a very good CBS News Inside Edition report recently about it. It's getting a lot of attention and a lot of sympathy for these very vulnerable baby monkeys that are being so mistreated. So I'm hopeful. I don't think it will be another 20 years before we get this done.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also a great NPR piece not too long ago about spider monkey trafficking. It's definitely coming up a lot more, and it's unfortunate that it's happening more, but it is opening a lot of eyes. And I also think the approach that you all are taking is a very good one in terms of highlighting the maybe previously lesser known issues like national security threats. That comes with this trade, and gaining partners and alliances through some of these different kinds of people who are impacted, that again, eyes are being opened a little more with this surge of spider monkeys, for example, whereas maybe that pressure wasn't being felt in 2005, for example, but it's only going to get worse before it gets better with something like this legislation. So, we certainly appreciate that approach, and we're doing our best within NAPSA as well to also take that approach. So I'm glad that you were able to share some information on that.
Thanks.
And please don't be shy. I see that there's quite a few people here watching. So if you do have any questions, please let us know. I'm going to put another link in the chat that might be helpful for people right now. It's just a government website to find your legislator. So in addition to Animal Welfare Institute's Action Center, you can also search who your legislators are just to have a little bit more information. And I see we do have a question from Sophia. Thank you, Sophia. And she said, when it comes to contacting our representatives or educating our community about the bill, is there any language you would avoid using?
Language I would avoid using? That's a good question. I always think that it is best to stick to the facts, to make the case that this harms animal welfare, this harms public safety, without I think without being perhaps overly dramatic about it. I don't know if that's the right word, because this is obviously a situation that deserves a huge amount of emotional buy-in. What's happening to these animals is terrible, but I do think that very polite and well-reasoned outreach is always going to be more effective than anything that doesn't rely simply on the facts of the situation. And I think to flip it, maybe give some advice about what you should include. I do think that if you have any personal experience, if you have worked at a sanctuary or worked at a zoo or, ever known someone who had a pet primate, I do think it's good to share that personal connection and that personal narrative, just to give a sense that this isn't theoretical for you, and that this is a real thing that people and animals are really experiencing, and to share what you took away from whatever your experience may have been.
Yeah, that's great advice. And similar to, some good advice I remember receiving many years ago is you don't always have to editorialize, right? Like
Yes, that's a much better way to put it.
like the facts speak for themselves, like you can state what the facts are and what your experience is and why it matters to you, and what's going on kind of speaks for itself. So that's great advice. Thank you. And we have another question. What are the current thoughts on, and this is from Walter, by the way, what are the current thoughts on what the Non-Human Rights Project has done over the years regarding giving personhood rights to certain primates? Any overlap here with that work?
I think that, the issue of primates treated as objects rather than as sentient beings, I think it deserves a whole range of approaches to try and solve the problems that arise from that. The Captive Primate Safety Act is important, but it's of course not the only work being done on this. And I have huge respect for my colleagues at a variety of other organizations who are being creative and tenacious and getting people to think differently about longstanding norms in terms of how our society interacts with and conceptualizes animals. And so yeah, I certainly don't want to represent this as the only worthwhile fight. There's a lot of good work going on out there.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great answer. Any other questions? Please feel free to type them in the chat. And while we're waiting for potentially any other questions, I'm curious, Kate, just if you have any thoughts, do you think there are any particular hotspots or like certain states or regions in the country where we're seeing a lot of issues? I mean, for example, just off the top of my head, I think a lot of us within this field know that Missouri, for example, is very lax. And we recently heard about the vervet monkeys that are on the loose that they haven't been able to capture. So I would personally say Missouri might be one of those areas, but wondering your thoughts as well, if there's any like particular states that there's just a lot of this going on.
Yeah, Missouri certainly is one of those areas. It featured heavily in chimp crazy.
Yes.
And so perhaps is a little bit notorious for that. I think, as I was talking about earlier, anywhere along the border with Mexico is a hotspot, particularly now. And I know that zoos down there have been saying that they are just completely overwhelmed, that, they want to help care for this influx of seized baby spider monkeys, and that it is simply a huge strain on resources, staff time, all of that. And so, yeah, I think California, Arizona, Texas for sure. Also, states in the South do tend to see more of this. And I would point to particularly Florida, which is perhaps notorious for having general enthusiasm for exotic pets. But part of that, I think, is that in those states, when primates escape and aren't recaptured, they can survive longer. It's warmer. Primates are generally better adapted to a warmer climate. At least many of the species are. And so, for example, in Florida, you'll see colonies of free living former pet primates or descendants of former pets, just because it's a climate that is similar enough to what their native range would be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm so glad that you've touched on the burden that these incidences place on law enforcement and sanctuaries, and it's something that NAPSA sees unfortunately all the time, and not just with spider monkeys, but with many species. But just to highlight kind of the scale of the spider monkey crisis, we've been contacted in cases where spider monkeys are confiscated from completely the opposite end of the country from the south and from the border, in states very, very far away. And it's just the burden that it places on everyone is enormous. There are very few sanctuaries that are able to care for spider monkeys. And in cases like this, where they're in hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the border, where maybe they're a little bit more experienced with these kind of confiscations, they you will be contacted sometimes by a state fish and wildlife service or an animal control department in a certain area, and they have no idea how to capture monkeys or lemurs, or how to care for them. They don't know how to find a reputable sanctuary, and thankfully they get in contact with NAPSA sometimes, and we're a great resource for that. But we don't often have easy answers for them, right? Like often the only option is to transport them to a sanctuary out of state. Who pays for that? Who pays for the transport? Who does the logistics? There's just so much, and sanctuaries are they're just stretched so thin. So it's so important for people to know that this problem is only growing. It's not getting better. And we desperately need this legislation. So we're so grateful for all you do to move it forward.
Likewise, I'm so grateful NAPSA exists. This burden should not rest so heavily on all of your sanctuaries, but thank goodness that they're there.
Well, thank you so much. Well, I don't see any more questions, so I think we can wrap it up. And Kate, I just want to thank you again so much for your time and your expertise and sharing all of this great information with us. So please, if you would like to share this this video with friends, it will stay recorded on our Facebook page. So if you know anyone who might be interested in watching, they can still check it out, even though our live stream is now coming to an end. So thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.